Is a king's duty worth his soul? 5 years ago, Alpha King Magnus Blackbane made a choice. He chose the word of a corrupt high priestess over the bond of his fated mate. He was told his mate Seline was womb dead, a curse that would end his royal line. So he did what a king must do. He stripped her of her furs and exiled her into the killing frost of the north. He thought he was saving his kingdom. He thought he was doing the right thing. He was wrong. Now his new queen Cressida has birthed a son, but the child is sickly, and the whispers in the pack are growing loud. Desperate to prove her dominance, Cressida convinces Magnus to do the unthinkable. Invite the exiled Selene to the naming ceremony to bless the new heir. They expect a beggar to crawl back to them. They expect a broken woman to kneel in the snow. But they forgot one thing. The fire that burns in the hearth is nothing compared to the fire that burns in a mother's heart. Selene isn't coming back alone. She's bringing a secret that has been hidden for 4 winters, a boy with the king's eyes and a voice that can command the gods. The king invited his past to mock it. Instead, he just invited his reckoning. The Frostfang citadel did not look like a home. It looked like a weapon carved from a glacier. The walls were black basalt, slick with perpetual ice, and the wind that howled through the arrow slits sounded less like a breeze and more like the wailing of the damned. In the center of this frozen fortress, Alpha King Magnus Blackbane sat in his private study, staring at a piece of heavy, cream-colored parchment. His hand, large and scarred from 100 battles, trembled slightly as he held it. It was an invitation. To Seline of the Outer Wilds. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. Seline. He closed his eyes, and the memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The sensory details of that day were etched into his mind forever. The smell of burning sage, the chanting of the high priestess, the way Selene had looked at him, not with anger, but with a terrifying silent confusion as the priestess declared her womb dead. "It is a rot, my king," the priestess had intoned, her voice rattling like dry bones. "Her womb is a graveyard. She will bear no fruit, only decay. To keep her is to doom your line." Magnus had looked at his council. He had looked at his subjects. They were terrified. An alpha king without an heir was a kingdom without a future. So he had hardened his heart. He had let the ice of the Frostfang enter his veins. "I reject you," he had said. The words had shattered the bond between them, snapping it like a frozen branch. "I, Alpha Magnus, reject Seline as my mate. You are exiled. Leave these lands and never return." He remembered watching her walk away into the blizzard. She hadn't cried, she hadn't begged. She had simply wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and vanished into the whiteout. He had told himself she would die quickly, that the cold was a mercy compared to the shame of a barren life. "You are brooding again, my love." The voice was sweet, cloying, like syrup poured over snow. Queen Cressida swept into the room. She was undeniably beautiful, with silver-blonde hair and eyes the color of winter sky. She wore a gown of white fox fur that cost more than a year's harvest. But to Magnus, she always smelled wrong. She smelled of anxiety and expensive perfume, a sharp chemical scent that tried to mask a rot he couldn't quite place. "The preparations for Prince Draven's naming ceremony are complete," Cressida said, placing a hand on Magnus's shoulder. Her nails were long and painted blood red. "But there is still the matter of the guest list." She plucked the invitation from his hand. "You must send it, Magnus," she purred. "The elders are restless. They still whisper about her. They say the winter has been too long because we angered the moon goddess by exiling a fated mate." "And inviting her back will fix that?" Magnus asked, his voice rough. "It will silence them," Cressida corrected. "When she comes, when she kneels before our son, when she blesses the heir she could never give you." The pack will see. They will see that she is broken. They will see that I am the true queen. It is a kindness, really, to let her see the future she failed to provide." Magnus looked at his wife. He saw the cruelty in her eyes, sharp and glittering. It wasn't kindness, it was a power play. Cressida needed Selene to kneel so that she could finally feel tall. "Send it," Magnus whispered, turning back to the window, staring out at the endless white waste. "If she's even alive to receive it." 500 miles south, past the ice wall and the frozen tundra, the world changed. The Eclipse estate was not a fortress of ice. It was a sprawling manor built of warm, golden sandstone, nestled in a valley where thermal springs kept the snow at bay. Here, the air didn't smell of frost. It smelled of spiced amber, roasting coffee, and gold. In the sun-drenched library, Selene sat at a desk made of mahogany. She was not the starving, ragged creature Magnus remembered. She wore a dress of deep, midnight blue velvet, tailored to accentuate curves that had only grown more womanly with age. Her hair, once a dull brown from malnutrition, was now a glossy, rich chestnut, pinned up with combs made of pearl. She was the matriarch of the Eclipse Merchant Pack, the wealthiest trade network in the north. She controlled the grain, she controlled the steel, and she controlled the information. "Mother?" A small voice broke her concentration. Selene turned, and the cold mask of the business tycoon melted instantly into a look of fierce, overwhelming love. Orion stood in the doorway. He was 4 years old, but he was tall for his age, with broad shoulders that promised immense strength. He wore a miniature suit of black velvet, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked over to her, holding a piece of paper. "I finished my letters. Is it good?" Seline took the paper. The handwriting was precise, almost unnatural for a toddler. A is for alpha, B is for betrayal, C is for consequence. Seline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It is perfect, my little star." "There is a rider at the gate," Orion said, his voice calm. "He smells like cold rocks and sadness." Selene stood up. She walked to the window. Down in the courtyard, a courier wearing the black and silver livery of the Frostfang citadel was shivering. He looked terrified to be so far south, surrounded by the opulence of the Eclipse estate. A servant entered the library, carrying a silver tray. On it lay a single, heavy envelope sealed with black wax. The seal of the Wolf King. Selene picked it up. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. Her spies had told her days ago. The naming ceremony, the sickly prince, the desperation of Queen Cressida. "Is it from him?" Orion asked. He didn't say father. He never called Magnus father. He called him the King of Ice. "Yes," Selene said. She broke the seal with a sharp crack. She read the flowery, mocking words. "We invite you to witness the blessing of the true heir, to find closure for your own barren fate." Barren. The word made Selene's wolf snarl in her chest. She looked at Orion. She looked at his eyes. Blackbane obsidian, dark, endless pools that mirrored the king's own gaze. But unlike Magnus, whose eyes were often clouded with doubt, Orion's eyes were clear. They burned with an intelligence and a power that terrified the nursemaids. They hadn't heard him roar yet. Not fully, but Selene knew. She had felt the house shake when he cried as a baby. She knew what he was. "What does he want?" Orion asked, tilting his head. "He wants us to come visit," Selene said softly. She crumpled the invitation in her hand, her knuckles turning white. "He wants to show us his son." "Is his son strong?" Orion asked. "No," Selene replied. "He is not." She walked over to Orion and knelt before him, smoothing his collar. "Do you want to go, Orion? Do you want to see the ice castle?" Orion looked at the crumpled paper, then at his mother. A shadow passed over his young face, a look of ancient genetic pride that belonged on a throne, not in a nursery. "Yes," Orion said. "I want to see the man who made you cry." Selene stood up. She walked to the bell pull and yanked it. "Prepare the carriage," she commanded the servant, who appeared instantly. "The gilded one, and pack the boy's formal furs, the black ones." She turned back to the window, looking north toward the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Tell the king we accept," Selene whispered to the glass. "He wants a show. I will give him a performance he will never forget." The great hall of the Frostfang citadel was a cavern of black stone and flickering torchlight, designed to make everyone inside feel small. Tonight, however, it was suffocating. 500 high-ranking wolves, the alphas of the northern clans, the merchant lords and the council elders, were packed into the space, their breath forming a collective mist in the frigid air. They were there to witness the naming ceremony of Prince Draven, the firstborn son of King Magnus and Queen Cressida. But beneath the polite conversation and the clinking of silver goblets, there was a current of unease. The pack smelled of expectation and doubt. They had heard the whispers. They knew the prince was small. They knew he didn't cry with the lungs of a predator. And they remembered Seline. On the raised dais, Queen Cressida sat on her throne, clutching her son a little too tightly. She looked radiant, her silver blonde hair cascading over her white furs like a waterfall of ice. But beneath the layers of silk and wealth, she was trembling. She glanced down at the bundle in her arms. Prince Draven was sleeping, but his breathing was shallow, a rasping, wet sound that terrified her. He was pale, his skin translucent enough to show the blue veins beneath. He hadn't shifted yet, not even a partial shift of the eyes or nails. At 3 months old, a Blackbane heir should be growling. Draven just whimpered. Cressida's hand drifted to the large sapphire amulet hanging around her neck. It pulsed with a faint, unnatural rhythm. It was a glamour stone, purchased from a dark witch in the southern swamps. As long as she wore it, the pack would see what she wanted them to see. A healthy, rosy-cheeked pup with strong lungs. They wouldn't see the sickness. They wouldn't see the failure. "He is quiet tonight," Magnus said, leaning over from his own massive iron throne. His voice was low, devoid of the pride a father should feel. Cressida flinched. "He is saving his strength for the blessing, my love. He is an observer, like you." Magnus grunted, turning his gaze back to the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall. He wasn't looking at his son. He was watching the entrance. He had been watching it for an hour, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his throne. "She won't come," Cressida said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "She's probably dead in a ditch somewhere, or too ashamed to show her face in rags." "The courier said she accepted," Magnus replied, his eyes never leaving the doors. "And he said she didn't look like a beggar." "Couriers can be bribed," Cressida snapped. "She is an exile, Magnus. She has nothing. When she walks through those doors, if she walks through them, she will be on her knees, and you will see that you made the right choice." Boom. The heavy iron-bound doors of the great hall didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that shook the dust from the tapestries. The chatter in the hall died instantly. Every head turned. Every nose tasted the air. They expected the stench of a rogue, unwashed fur, desperation, and sickness. They expected a woman broken by 5 years of winter. Instead, the scent that rolled into the hall was warm, rich, and intoxicating. It hit them like a physical wave. Spiced amber, roasting coffee, and gold. It was the scent of unbridled wealth. A collective gasp ripped through the room as Seline stepped across the threshold. She was not wearing rags. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, so dark it looked like a piece of the night sky had been cut and draped over her body. The fabric shimmered with crushed diamond dust, catching the torchlight with every step. Over her shoulders, She wore a cloak of golden fox fur, a color so rare in the north that it was worth more than the entire citadel. Her hair, once limp and dull, was piled high in an intricate braid woven with gold chains and black pearls. Her face was not gaunt, it was striking, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, her skin glowing with the health of someone who had never missed a meal. She didn't look like an exile. She looked like an empress who had just bought the building. "Selene?" Elder Vane whispered from the front row, dropping his wine goblet. Selene ignored him. She walked down the central aisle, her head held high. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at the dais, directly at Magnus. Her gaze was a physical weight. It was cold, amused, and utterly fearless. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, his small hand tucked securely in hers, was a boy. Magnus felt his heart stop. It seized in his chest, a painful, sudden arrest that stole the breath from his lungs. The boy was 4 years old. He wore a suit of black velvet with silver buttons, a miniature version of the royal court attire, but tailored with better fabric. He walked with a calm, predatory grace that no toddler should possess. He didn't look at the crowd with fear. He looked at them with assessment. He had hair as black as a raven's wing, swept back from a forehead that mirrored Magnus's own. He had the same sharp jawline, the same brooding set of the brow. But it was the eyes that paralyzed the king. As they drew closer, passing the stunned nobles, the boy looked up at the throne. His eyes were black, not dark brown, not gray, Blackbane obsidian. They were void black, absorbing the light, identical to the eyes that stared back at Magnus in the mirror every morning. They were the eyes of the first Alpha, the eyes of the pure bloodline. Prince Draven, in Cressida's arms, had pale blue eyes. The silence in the hall was deafening. You could hear the torches sputtering. You could hear the heartbeat of 500 wolves accelerating in unison as the realization swept through the room like a contagion. The timeline. 5 years ago she was exiled. The boy is 4. Magnus slowly stood up. He didn't mean to. His body moved on instinct, drawn by the magnetic pull of his own blood. Cressida sat frozen, her hand clutching the sapphire amulet so hard her knuckles were white. She smelled the change in the air. She smelled the spiced amber mixing with a scent that made her blood run cold. Winter frost. The boy smelled like the king. Seline stopped at the foot of the dais. She didn't kneel. She didn't bow. She simply stood there, radiating power, looking up at the man who had sentenced her to death. "Happy naming day, Magnus," Selene said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and carried to the back of the hall without effort. "You invited the Barren wolf to bless your heir, so here I am." She gestured to the hall, to the finery, to her own magnificent dress. "I must say, your hospitality has improved, though the heating in here is still atrocious." Magnus couldn't speak. He gripped the hilt of his sword to keep his hands from shaking. He looked at Seline, then down at the boy. "Who?" Magnus rasped, his voice sounding wrecked. "Who is this?" Selene looked down at Orion. She smiled, a genuine, terrifyingly proud smile. "This?" She brushed a stray lock of hair from the boy's forehead. "This is just a ghost, Magnus. A memory you threw away in the snow." "He has my eyes," Magnus whispered. The words weren't meant for the crowd, but in the silence, they boomed like thunder. "Does he?" Selene asked, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "That is strange, because according to your high priestess," she pointed a gloved finger at the withered woman standing beside the throne, "my womb is a graveyard, dead, rotted, incapable of life." The high priestess shrank back into the shadows, clutching her staff. She looked terrified. Selene took a step up the dais. The royal guards tensed, but Magnus held up a hand, stopping them. He needed to see. He needed to be close. "Orion," Selene said softly. Introduce yourself to the king." The boy, Orion, let go of his mother's hand. He stepped forward. He stood at the base of the Iron Throne, looking up at the massive, terrifying figure of the Alpha King. He didn't flinch. He didn't cower behind his mother's skirts. He tilted his head, studying Magnus with those abyssal black eyes. "Hello," Orion said. His voice was clear, steady, and devoid of the high-pitched tremble of a child. "My mother says you are the King of Ice." Magnus walked down the steps. 1, 2, 3. He stopped on the bottom step, bringing him eye level with the boy. The scent was undeniable now. Winter frost. It was his own scent, reflected back at him, but mixed with the fresh, clean smell of a young, powerful alpha. Orion, Magnus tested the name. It felt heavy, important. A hunter's name. A star's name, Orion corrected. "Because I shine in the dark." Magnus felt a tear prick the corner of his eye, a sensation he hadn't felt since he was a pup. He reached out a hand, trembling, wanting to touch the boy's cheek, to verify that he was real and not a hallucination born of his own guilt. "Don't touch him!" The command cracked through the air like a whip. Selene stepped between them. She didn't shove the king, but her presence was a wall. She looked at Magnus with eyes that held no love, only cold, hard judgment. "You lost the right to touch him 5 years ago," Selene hissed, her voice low so only the dais could hear. "When you sent his mother to die in a blizzard." "I didn't know," Magnus choked out, the same excuse, the only excuse he had. "Selene, I swear, they told me you were Barren. They told me—" "And you believed them," Selene cut him off. "You didn't ask me. You didn't check. You listened to a paid liar and a jealous court, and you threw your mate to the wolves." She leaned in closer, her scent of spiced amber overwhelming his senses, making his wolf howl with longing and regret. "You invited me here to mock me, Magnus. You wanted to see me on my knees. You wanted to show me your true heir." She turned and pointed a finger at Queen Cressida and the bundle in her arms. "So show me," Selene challenged, her voice rising so the whole room could hear. "Show me the prince who is worth more than my life. Show me the alpha who will lead this pack." Cressida stood up, her face a mask of panic and fury. The glamour stone on her neck pulsed violently, fighting to maintain the illusion of health around the sickly baby. "How dare you!" Cressida screeched. "You bring a bastard into this house, a changeling you found in the gutter to mimic the king. Guards, seize this whore, seize the abomination." "He is not a bastard," Magnus roared, spinning on his wife. The sound shook the dust from the rafters. "Look at him, Cressida. Look at his eyes. He is a Blackbane." "He is a trick," Cressida yelled, her composure fracturing. "It is a glamour. She is a witch. Draven is your son. Draven is the heir." She held up the baby. "Bless him. Prove you are loyal to the crown, you exile filth. Kneel and bless the prince." Selene looked at the baby. Her eyes narrowed. She possessed the sight of a merchant lord, the ability to spot a fake from a mile away. She looked at the shimmering air around the baby's face. "He smells like milk and sickness," Selene said calmly. "And magic." "Liar!" Cressida screamed. "Orion," Selene said, not taking her eyes off the queen. "What do you see?" Orion stepped forward again. He looked past Magnus, past the guards, directly at the baby in Cressida's arms. He wrinkled his nose. "The baby is fading," Orion stated matter-of-factly. "He looks like a ghost, and the lady," he pointed at Cressida, "she is wearing a lying stone." "The amulet," Selene said, her voice turning to ice. "A glamour stone. Used to hide defects, used to hide weakness." She turned to the crowd. "Is this your king? A man who is fooled by a stone? A man who casts out his true blood for an illusion?" "Enough!" Cressida shrieked. She was losing them. She could see the doubt in the elder's eyes. She could see Magnus staring at Orion with hunger in his soul. She had to end this. "Guards, kill them!" Kill the changeling before he curses the prince." The High Guard, loyal to the crown but confused by the conflicting orders, hesitated, but the captain, a man paid by Cressida's family, drew his spear. "For the queen!" the captain shouted, lunging forward. He aimed his spear not at Seline, but at Orion. Magnus roared, reaching for his sword, but he was too slow. He was on the bottom step. The captain was already moving. "No!" Magnus screamed. But Selene didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't try to shield her son. She simply watched. Orion looked at the charging guard. He looked at the spear tip descending toward his chest. He didn't blink. He took a deep breath, his small chest expanding far beyond what should be possible for a 4-year-old. The air around him seemed to suck inward, creating a vacuum. The torches nearest to him flickered and died. And then the boy opened his mouth. The sound that tore from the boy's throat was not a scream. It was not a cry for help. It was a frequency that predated the written history of the Frostfang wolves. It was the sound of tectonic plates grinding together deep beneath the earth. It was the sound of an avalanche starting on the highest peak. It was the Titan's roar. For 3 generations, the Blackbane line had whispered about this power, a vocal magic so potent it could command the elements themselves, but no king had possessed it since the great founder. Until now. The sonic wave hit the charging captain of the guard like a battering ram. The steel tip of his spear, inches from Orion's chest, didn't just stop. It vibrated until it shattered into shrapnel. The captain himself was lifted off his feet, thrown backward through the air as if flicked by the finger of a god. He crashed into the stone pillar 20 feet away, sliding down in a heap of dented armor. But the roar didn't stop there. It expanded outward, a visible ripple of distortion in the air. Crash. The stained glass windows lining the great hall, masterpieces depicting the history of the pack, exploded inward. Shards of colored glass rained down like lethal confetti, glittering in the torchlight. The iron chandeliers swung violently, casting wild, dancing shadows across the room. The torches flared blue, then extinguished, plunging the hall into a sudden, terrifying gloom illuminated only by the moonlight pouring through the broken windows. And the wolves. 500 of the most powerful alphas in the north, warriors who had faced bears, rogues, and death without flinching, did not just cower. Their biology betrayed them. The Titan's roar was not a request. It was an absolute biological imperative. Submit. One by one, like dominoes falling in a gale, the knees of the nobility hit the stone floor. Elder Vane dropped. The generals dropped. Even the high priestess, clutching her staff, fell to her knees, her face pressed against the cold rock. And on the dais, the King of Ice fell. Magnus fought it. His alpha wolf roared in protest, clawing at the inside of his skull, demanding he stand. He was the king. He bowed to no one. But the power radiating from the 4-year-old boy was ancient. It bypassed his will and spoke directly to his blood. Magnus's knees hit the dais with a heavy thud. He gasped, his hands splayed on the stone, his head forced low. He couldn't look up. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on the back of his neck. Only 2 people in the entire hall remained standing. Seline, who looked down at her son with a calm, vindicated smile, and Orion. The boy closed his mouth. The roar cut off instantly, leaving a silence so profound it hurt the ears. The pressure lifted, but the terror remained. Orion looked at the unconscious captain. He looked at the kneeling crowd. He looked at the king on his knees. He dusted off his velvet jacket, unbothered. "He tried to poke me," Orion said to his mother, his voice returning to the clear, innocent tenor of a child. "That was rude." "Very rude," Seline agreed, smoothing his hair. On the dais, a sudden, frantic shrieking shattered the moment. "No, no. Stay away." It was Cressida. She had fallen to her knees as well, clutching the baby. But something was wrong. The sonic wave of the Titan's roar hadn't just affected biological matter. It had disrupted magical frequencies. The sapphire amulet around her neck, the glamour stone, had cracked. A thin spiderweb fracture ran down the center of the gem. The blue light pulsed erratically, then flickered out, and with the light, the lie died. The rosy cheeks of Prince Draven faded. The strong, chubby limbs withered. The illusion melted away like snow on a hot stove, revealing the truth underneath. The baby in Cressida's arms was tiny, malnourished. His skin was a sickly gray, translucent enough to show the weak, fluttering beat of his heart. He didn't cry. He wheezed, a pathetic bubbling sound. And his eyes were not blue. They were milky white. Blind. A runt, Elder Vane whispered from the floor, his voice carrying in the silence. By the gods, the prince is a runt. The realization swept through the hall. A runt was not just a small wolf. In the harsh winters of the Frost Fang, a runt was a tragedy, but a sickly runt presented as a healthy alpha heir. That was treason. That was a deception that endangered the entire pack's survival. Magnus slowly lifted his head. The submission command had faded, but the weight in his chest was heavier than ever. He looked at the baby. He looked at the cracked amulet hanging from his wife's neck. He stood up. His movements were stiff, like a man waking from a coma. He walked over to Cressida. She shrank back, clutching the wheezing infant, her eyes wide with terror. "Magnus," she sobbed, I did it for you. To give the kingdom hope. He just needs time. The healers said." Magnus reached out and ripped the cracked amulet from her neck. He held it up to the moonlight. It was dark magic. Swamp magic. Forbidden in the Frost Fang. "You lied," Magnus whispered. The anger in his voice was terrifying because it was so quiet. "You lied to the pack. You lied to the council. You lied to me." He looked at the baby. His son. A boy who should have been receiving medical care, not paraded around as a trophy. "You denied him treatment," Magnus snarled, throwing the amulet to the floor where it shattered completely. "To save your own vanity, you hid his sickness behind a rock. You let him suffer in silence so you could play queen." "I am the queen," Cressida shrieked, scrambling backward. "I am Lady Cressida of the High Vale. You cannot touch me. That thing," she pointed at Orion. "That is the monster. He broke the spell. He attacked us." "He revealed you." Selene's voice cut through the hysteria. Selene walked up the steps of the dais, Orion at her side. The guards didn't move to stop her. They were too busy staring at the boy who had just commanded them to kneel. Selene stopped in front of Magnus. She looked at the sickly baby, and for a moment her expression softened. Not for Cressida, but for the innocent child caught in the web of lies. "He needs lung root tea and a warmer climate, Magnus," Selene said quietly. "He isn't a bad wolf. He's just weak. But you," she looked Magnus in the eye, "you traded a titan for a ghost." Magnus looked from the sickly infant to the powerful, glowing boy standing beside Selene. The contrast was brutal. On one side, a lie wrapped in magic. On the other, the raw, undeniable power of his bloodline, honed by the woman he had discarded. He looked at Orion. The boy was watching him, not with fear, not with love, but with curiosity. "Orion," Magnus breathed. "The Titan's roar. It hasn't been heard since King Valdor." "He sings to the mountains sometimes," Selene said casually. "They sing back." Magnus fell to his knees again. This time it wasn't forced by magic. It was forced by the crushing weight of his own regret. "I exiled him," Magnus whispered, his hands gripping his hair. "I exiled a Titan." "You exiled us," Selene corrected. She turned to the crowd, to the kneeling nobles who were watching the drama unfold with bated breath. "You all watched," Selene said, her voice ringing with authority. 5 years ago, you stood in this hall and watched your king strip me of my furs. You watched him send me into the ice. You called me Barren. You called me cursed. She placed a hand on Orion's shoulder. Is this a curse? Orion looked at the crowd. His obsidian eyes flashed. No, the crowd murmured, the sound rippling like a wave. Hail the Titan! Hail the true heir! It was the fickle nature of the pack. They followed strength, and Orion was the strongest thing they had ever seen. Cressida wailed, clutching her sickly child, realizing her reign was over. The high priestess tried to sneak away into the shadows, but a growl from Orion stopped her in her tracks. Don't go, Orion said calmly. We haven't finished the game. Magnus looked up at Seline. His face was wet with tears. The Ice King had melted. Seline, he begged, what have I done? You broke the world, Magnus, Selene said, looking down at him like a goddess judging a mortal. And now you have to live in the ruins. The silence in the great hall was heavy, filled with the scent of shattered glass and shattered pride. The torchlight flickered on the shards of the glamour stone, the only remains of Queen Cressida's deception. Magnus remained on his knees. He felt naked without his arrogance. For 5 years he had worn his guilt like armor, telling himself it was necessary, that he had sacrificed his happiness for the good of the pack. But looking at Orion, this magnificent, terrifying boy, and looking at Draven, the sickly, innocent victim of his wife's vanity, he realized the truth. He hadn't sacrificed for the pack. He had sacrificed for his own fear. He stood up slowly. He was still the king. Even if he felt like a beggar, he had a duty to finish this. Guards, Magnus said. His voice was hoarse, but it carried the weight of judgment. The royal guard snapped to attention, desperate to prove their loyalty after being floored by a 4-year-old. Take Lady Cressida to the Tower of Silence, Magnus commanded. He didn't look at her wailing form. She is stripped of her titles. She is stripped of her rank. Let the healers attend to the child. Do whatever is necessary to save him. But she, his jaw tightened. She is never to see him again. A mother who would hide her child's pain for status is no mother at all. No, Magnus, you can't! Cressida screamed as the guards dragged her away, her heels scraping across the stone. I am the queen! I am the queen! Her screams faded as the heavy doors slammed shut. Magnus turned to the high priestess. The old wolf was trembling so hard, her staff rattled against the floor. And you, Magnus said softly, the voice of the goddess. My king, the priestess stammered. The signs were unclear. The moon was clouded. Orion, Magnus said, turning to his son. Can you smell her? Orion sniffed the air. He wrinkled his nose. She smells like old gold and lies. Bribed, Magnus concluded. You sold my future for gold. He drew his sword. The sound of steel on leather echoed through the hall. I will not kill you, Magnus said, though the priestess looked like she wished he would. Death is too quick. You're banished. You will walk the same path you sent Seline on. You will walk into the blizzard without furs, without fire, without a pack. If the goddess truly favors you, perhaps she will keep you warm. Mercy, the priestess cried. I gave my mercy to the ice 5 years ago, Magnus said coldly. Get her out of my sight. The guards dragged the wailing woman away. Now the hall was empty of villains. It was just the king, the queen he threw away, and the son he never knew. Magnus sheathed his sword. He turned to Seline. She was watching him, her face unreadable. She didn't look impressed. She looked tired. Justice is served, Magnus said, spreading his hands. The liars are gone. The path is clear. He took a step toward her. The hope in his chest was a painful, fluttering thing. Seline, look around you. The pack bows to him. He is the Titan. He is the miracle we prayed for. He gestured to the empty throne beside his. take your place. I will annul the marriage to Cressida. I will declare you my true queen before the sunrise. We can start over. We can raise him together. He needs a father to teach him to control that power. He needs a king." Selene looked at the throne. It was made of black iron and wolf pelts. It looked uncomfortable, cold. She looked at Magnus. She saw the desperation in his eyes. He genuinely believed this was the happy ending. He believed that punishing the bad guys fixed the wound. She laughed. It was a soft, sad sound. "Oh, Magnus," she whispered, "you still don't understand." "What don't I understand?" Magnus pleaded. "I'm offering you the kingdom. I'm offering you the legacy. Everything I have is yours." "I don't want your kingdom," Selene said. "I have my own. I built it from scratch while you sat on this rock and felt sorry for yourself." She walked over to him, close enough that he could smell the spiced amber and gold. "You think banishing Cressida fixes the night you banished me?" she asked. "You think killing the priestess brings back the nights I slept in a cave, holding a newborn, terrified that the cold would take him?" She touched his chest, right over his heart. "You broke the bond, Magnus. You looked me in the eye and rejected me. That isn't a knot you can retie just because I turned out to be valuable." "I was wrong," Magnus cried, grabbing her hand. "I was a fool, but I am begging you, for the boy, for Orion. He belongs here. This is his birthright." Selene pulled her hand away. "His birthright is to be loved," she said fiercely, "not to be used as a political prop to save a failing dynasty. Look at your court, Magnus." She gestured to the kneeling nobles. "They bow to him now because they fear him, because he is strong. But if he were weak, if he were like Draven, they would throw him in the snow just like they did me." She shook her head. "I will not raise him in a tank of sharks. I will raise him in the sun. I will raise him to be a merchant lord, a man who understands the value of things, not a king who throws away diamonds because he thinks they are glass." She turned to Orion. "Come, my star. The show is over." Orion looked at Magnus. He studied the king one last time. "Are you coming to the warm lands?" Orion asked. Magnus looked at his son. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tear off his crown and follow them, but he was the king. He had a sickly son in the nursery who had no mother. He had a kingdom in chaos. He was chained to this ice as surely as the castle itself. "I cannot," Magnus whispered, his voice breaking. Orion nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth black stone. He handed it to Magnus. "For the baby," Orion said. "It's a sunstone. It stays warm. Put it in his bed." Magnus took the stone. It was warm against his cold palm, a gift of mercy from a son he didn't deserve. "Thank you," Magnus choked out. Seline took Orion's hand. They turned and walked down the aisle. The nobles parted for them, heads bowed low, not daring to look the Titan in the eye. Magnus stood at the foot of the dais. He watched them walk toward the great doors. The moonlight framed them in a halo of silver. They looked like gods leaving a graveyard. "Selene!" Magnus called out, one last desperate plea. She stopped at the threshold. She didn't turn around. "I will wait," Magnus shouted, his voice echoing off the empty walls. "I will keep the throne for him when he is of age. If he wants it, it is his." Selene paused. She squeezed Orion's hand. "He doesn't need your throne, Magnus," she called back, her voice carried by the wind. "He already has the world." The heavy doors slammed shut. Magnus was left standing in the silence. The torches sputtered. The glass crunched under his boots. He looked at the empty throne beside him. He looked at the warm stone in his hand. He sat down on the iron throne. It was cold. It was hard. And for the first time in 5 years, he realized just how big the Frostfang citadel really was. He was the Alpha King. He was the ruler of the North. He had the power, the title, and the crown. But as the wind howled outside, mocking him with the name of the woman he had lost, Magnus Blackbane realized the truth. He was just a man sitting on a block of ice, waiting for a winter that would never end.